I do believe that we've lived last century in a world where governments had enormous say in how the world worked and how rules were made and how people lived within the law. I think that the internet has created a transnational layer that lives above the national level, that enables companies that control this layer to have an outsized role.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen those companies take that role and sometimes abuse it and sometimes respect it. We've seen both.
Right.
And what I was contending and proposing at the time was that if I want to really look at who should be at the table when it comes to the governance of those matters, that it should be governments should have a seat at the table, companies should have a seat at the table, but so do we as citizens. We need to have a seat at the table. We, in fact, I think are necessary in this trilateral relationship in order to create balance between the power of governments and the growing power of businesses. Now, it's very hard for citizens to have a seat at the table because who will be invited? There's billions of us.
Right.
And how do you structure a role for the citizen to sit at the same table as business and governments? And I, frankly, when I was at the World Economic Forum, that was one of the things I spent quite a bit of time conveying to the leadership there, that whilst the World Economic Forum brings mostly businesses and the governments as well to the table, that they were missing that third leg, the importance of the voice of the people, which can be called civil society, it can be called different things, but it needs to be at the table. And I do think that each of us, as I mentioned in that TED Talk, have a responsibility to do our little bit of making sure our voice is heard. Because businesses listen to their customers at the end of the day. Businesses listen to the consumer, otherwise they can't thrive.
Yeah.
So that's what I was confused.
I think a cynical person might say that the people running the World Economic Forum, your politicians, these are the elites. They're not, they know what's there from their point of view. They know what's best for the citizen. They don't need them to have a seat at the table. And I think people point to things like, the World Economic Forum saying, you'll own nothing and be happy, in 2030 and things like that, as if their influence on the future of society, is already predetermined, right?
Yeah.
So,
look, I'll just,
what do you say to those people?
Yeah, the World Economic Forum is necessary but not sufficient. It's a necessary venue because when you close off those leaders of the world, those leaders of businesses, and frankly, a fair number of heads of civil society groups, Human Rights Watch and others are all present. I think they need this dialogue between them in these kind of halls of Davos to at least be able to, besides making deals and doing all the other things they do, but at least have some direct dialogue and facing of the issues in the absence of some of the lights and the media, and they do that. The last CEO of, I'll mention him by name because very sadly Pierre Nanterre, the last CEO of Accenture, one of the largest consulting companies in the world. Pierre passed away suddenly recently. Pierre, his voice is still in my head from some private meetings we were having in Davos, and how he stood up and pounded his hand on the table saying, we as tech CEOs are not embracing our full responsibility towards the people we serve. And he engaged other CEOs and got them to be more focused on some key points. So I do think some good comes out of that, of the freedom to have that level of discussion with people who are, in powerful positions. The problem becomes when this group in Davos becomes insular and does not listen to the people outside.
Mm-hmm.
That's what, in a way, Pierre was telling them that day. We must listen to the people outside. They're screaming of inequality. They're screaming of, this is before ESG became what it is today. They're screaming of issues of governance and environmental impact, and we're not paying attention to these things. I really do believe there is a place for this meeting. It's not a perfect gathering. It needs to evolve, but it has a place and it has a purpose. And I tried my best when I was there for a number of years to do my part, in bringing some level of listening and responsibility that I had, but also other people had in our affairs. So I understand the criticism.
Yeah,
and I appreciate that.
I think people realistically are concerned that, your big tech CEOs, you can think of the big 3 or 4, Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, are more influential than any head of any state. And they do go to these congressional hearings and they give all the polite answers, but it seems, I think it seems for a lot of average citizens to be a kind of a dog and pony show a little bit.
It is, and some of those people dodge their responsibilities,
right,
by simply saying, well, we went and answered the questions, or I'm going to call out some of them for something I'm hearing a lot lately. Oh, come and regulate us. Come and regulate us. I mean, I'm sorry, but this is nonsense. And this is ducking your responsibility. Yes, you should work with governments to translate your policies into actual laws or regulations. But don't just sit back and say, come and regulate me. And by the way, they say that, and at the same time, they hire 1,000 lobbyists in Washington
right,
to make sure that it goes their way,
right.
Versus thinking, what is my responsibility? When as in a private conversation I was having with a very, prominent person from the religious world, he was telling me, I mean, how could we sit by when teenage girls are killing themselves because of social media?
Mm-hmm.
They're killing themselves. The day I was visiting with this particular person, I'll just leave this private. I mean, in the country where he was, 2 girls had killed themselves. And he asked me, he said, what is our responsibility? How could we wash our hands completely? I mean, we can't take all the responsibility as tech CEOs, but we have to have a proactive approach that may, yes, expose some of our role into creating all of that. But if we're responsible, we will be a better business.
Yeah.
And people will invest more in us, and people will value our shares better. We'll be more valuable to the world than if we duck and say, come and regulate us. That's the answer.
So Fadi, with that, I think, I don't know if they all share your level of ethics and moral responsibility. So at the end of the day, it comes down to whether they have any competition, whether there's any alternatives. And it seems like at this point, in certain spheres, they're just essentially monopolies. So while I agree, I think the oneness of the internet lowers the barrier of entry for a lot of people. Anyone can just hop online, start an online store, and make a couple thousand side business. On the flip side, Amazon will get all your data from that business, and now they're just gonna knock you off, and you're gonna have to be forced to reduce your costs, and you're out of business. So there's kind of I feel like a delicate balance there. How do we navigate that going forward?
I think you ask again a very astute question, and I'll take you
Mm,
back to my answer earlier after that TED talk. You know, we cannot simply count on the company doing the right thing. Having said this, this does not abdicate the company CEOs from attempting to do the right thing. So all I was saying is they have a responsibility. Governments have a responsibility. If they say, oh my God, this is moving so fast, I can't keep up with these companies, they're so powerful, then that's also wrong. Governments
mm,
have an important role to play, and it doesn't have to be simply regulatory. At a minimum, it could be exposing the facts and making sure the public understands what a company is doing at a minimum. Then they could also go forward beyond that and set up rules, regulations, and laws as necessary. So I think government should play their role. I think companies also should play their role. And then when neither gets us there, we need the citizen, the consumer, the customer, the civil society activists to be at the table screaming at the top of their lungs, or screaming, as we always say, with their customer dollars, with their subscriptions. You know, if all of us in one day decided to stop our subscriptions to one or the other tech company, let me tell you, they will listen.